there's few blessings that are greater than that. And so for the time remaining, I just real quickly want to say, to kind of unpack, how do we get this kind of burden? How do we get a passion? And what does it mean really to, and really why should we invite others to church? And so I want to kind of unpack this of getting a burden for those around us. And the first thing we got to understand is that what matters to God should matter to us. Why should we have a burden for the lost is what matters to God should matter to us. I don't think any of us would argue the fact that when it comes to those who are most on God's heart, where he's a burden the most, especially within the story, we see Jesus a burden the most, is for those who are far from him, who don't know him. In fact, we see this in verse 41 in the story. It says, as he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, it says he wept over it. He wept over it. Now, he wasn't weeping and he wasn't heartbroken over the pain that he was about to endure on the cross. He was heartbroken because he saw a city of people who were in desperate need. They were in desperate need in their marriages. They were desperate need in their soul. They were desperate need in their lives. They were in desperate need for something more than the life they were experiencing and more than the life they were living. And unfortunately, the very answer to that need was walking right past them, and they totally missed it. I mean, here Jesus is walking right through the city, the Messiah, the Savior, the very thing that they needed most, and they were totally missing it, and his heart was broken over that. He had a burden for those who were lost, a burden for those who were far from him. And listen, I sometimes wonder if maybe the reason that many of us, we don't have a burden or a sense of urgency to invite others is that if we're honest, what matters to God, maybe it doesn't matter to us as much. At least as much as maybe it used to, right? Because if it really mattered to us, I think a lot like this story, it would change the way we see the world around us. It would change the way we see just right around. It would change the way we see these empty seats. It would create a burden. It would create an urgency that I think sometimes we can so easily miss. Because, I mean, think about it. Think of the last time that something or somebody really mattered to you. It changed how you saw your world, right? I mean, think about like when you wanted a car, maybe before you had a car, and you were just in desperate need of getting a car was all that mattered to you. And that's all you saw, right? It's all you prayed for was a car. When you're driving around, all you saw was the car you wanted. When you were hanging out with friends, you saw a car that you wanted to borrow. It changed how you saw when you wanted it. But the problem is, and I think sometimes what happens to us, even when it comes to our faith, comes to our walk with Jesus, is that once we get it, like all of a sudden we quit seeing it. We quit seeing the need. We quit seeing the drive, that sense of urgency. We lose a sense of value to it. Once we get the car, we're dropping the big gulp in the seat, and we got fries that have been there for like 10 years. We don't clean the car up. I mean, it loses its value. And listen, that's my fear for us. And in fact, I mentioned it last week, is that my fear for us is that the good news would become old news to us. That what matters to God, it would quit mattering to us. And as a result, we quit seeing the need. We quit seeing the urgency. We quit seeing the burden for those around us. And so that's my prayer. That's my prayer for us tonight, is that you and I, that we would begin to get a burden again in such a way that it changes the way we see the world around us. Because I really believe this. I think if they matter to us the way that they matter to God, it would change, again, not just actually how we see them, but I think even how we respond to them. To those who are far from Him, to those who have yet to ever darken the doors of a church, those who are broken, those who are hurting. Because that's the other thing, is a burden doesn't just change the way we see the world around us, it also changes our response to the world around us. I mean, again, going back to this whole idea of thinking about things that matter to you and how that affects how you act and how you respond. I mean, think about like if weather's warming up. I know for a lot of us, like barbecuing matters to us. And think about all the work and all the effort you'll put into that. I mean, you got to get the propane tank, or you got to get the charcoals, you got to get the perfect seasoning, the perfect meat. You'll go through all this effort. There's an action that comes with that because it matters to you. Or hunting season. When you find out hunting season is coming up, I mean, man, you'll take off weeks out of work, and you'll get the trail cam set up, and you'll buy the equipment. Or when someone matters to you, that's like all you see is them, right? That's all your life is about. You quit hanging out with the friends of old. It's just like, man, that's all I'm about. You'll stay up and you'll talk on the phone about nothing. And it'll be like, you hang up. No, you hang up. No, you hang up. I mean, you'll go to extinct. You'll discover cologne that you didn't even know was there. I mean, you'll start to dress up because when someone matters to you, you can't help but make a move. You can't help but have a corresponding action that as a result of that. And listen, again, I sometimes wonder if our inactivity, our unwillingness to sometimes invite, our unwillingness to sometimes take on the burden is that if we're honest, is what matters to God doesn't quite matter to us like it used to. Because if it did, it would change how we see our world. It would change how we respond to our world. I mean, because think about it this way. Along those lines, think about, again, if it's personal to us, it's like, again, we respond. If it matters to us, we respond. I was thinking of this as like, when you hear like a news story of like a building that's burning down in L.A., your natural response isn't to just, oh, well, I'm going to put my Superman t-shirt on and head to the airport, and I'm going to go and deal with it. But when it's someone or something in the house that's involved in this fire is your house, and there's the person that's involved in it is your kid, how many know you're going to do whatever it takes? You're going to be moved to action. You're willing to put your life on the line and risk anything and everything to save them, right? And so that's my heart, is that you would get a burden. That this wouldn't just become some ethereal, big picture thing, but it would become personal to you. It would become personal to you. That burden in such a way that, again, it changes the way you respond to the world around you. It changes the way you see the world around you. That my prayer for you and I is that we'd see the world around us differently. That when you look at your town, you wouldn't see it how you see it, but you'd start to see it how God sees it. When you see your enemies, you wouldn't see them how you see them. You'd see them how God sees them. When you look at your coworkers, you wouldn't see them how you tend to see them, but you'd see them how God sees them. Because I think if you and I saw our coworkers and our neighbors and those friends of ours, those relationships of ours that we know are far from God, if we saw them the way that God sees them, we would have a very different view. And I believe we'd have a whole lot greater urgency when it comes to embracing this burden of inviting those around us. Which leads to the second thing of creating this burden is you got to understand there's more at stake than we often realize. There's more at stake than we often realize. Maybe not for us who know Jesus. I mean, we've got heaven. We've got eternity to look forward to. But the truth of the matter is that for those who don't know Jesus, eternity's at stake. That's the truth of it. And when I say eternity's at stake, we're not talking a bad day or a bad year. I mean, anyone had a bad year in life? Anyone had a bad memory, a bad moment, a bad job, a bad marriage? Okay, don't raise your hand on that one. But we have bad moments, we have bad experiences, we have bad years, but that's not what we're talking about here. See, I think sometimes we can relate to a bad day, we can relate to a bad year, but we don't have oftentimes the mental capacity to even begin to understand what a bad eternity is all about. I mean, think about it. You take your worst day and times that by forever. Remember that day when maybe you lost someone who was dear to you or close to you, and you didn't even have enough energy or enough strength or enough willpower to even call anybody, to ask for help, to have someone come sit with you. And even if they did, you know that no thank you card or nothing they could ever say is going to somehow take that pain away that day. Well, think about that worst day in your life, and if you've ever lived for even a breath, you can all know what a worst day is like, and then times that for forever. and you start to begin to maybe get a slight fraction of what we're talking about here. See, we're not talking about simply a bad day. We're talking about a bad eternity. That's what's at stake. This is not a bad career. It's not like I lost my car. It's not like I'm coming out of a bad relationship. This isn't about, when we're talking about inviting people and bringing people to church, especially as we start leading up to Easter, we're not talking about inviting them in so they can get a cool church bumper sticker or t-shirt or mug. This isn't even about growing a larger church. It's about the fact that you and I, we know someone in our life who's in the balance of being eternally separated from God forever. And I know this isn't popular preaching. It's not like what we would like to hear, but it's the truth of the matter. And listen, if we hope to get a burden for reaching our city and reaching those around us, you got to understand what's at stake here. It's not just a bad moment or a bad dream or a bad memory. We're talking eternity. You got to know what's at stake. I like what Jude 1, chapter 1, verse 22 puts it. It says, be merciful to those who doubt. Save others by snatching them from the fire. I like that term, snatching, right? Because again, it speaks to the urgency you and I should have. The heart you and I should have. And we think of snatching. Snatching's not that's not a gentle action. Right? Like if you ever been snatched by a teacher, like in the hallways, remember when you were in school and you're like running down the hallways and a teacher snatches you? Like, hey, quit running. I mean, it kind of hurts, like jolts you, right? Or if you're a parent and you ever had to snatch your kid. This is my experience almost every time I go to a Walmart. My boy, he'll get out of the car and it's like his first thing to do is it's like he wants to immediately, he's drawn to running in front of oncoming traffic, right? And so what I got to do is I jump out there and I snatch him, right? And of course it always leads to this, debate basically like, Dad, why'd you do that? It scared me. And I'm like, well, you scared me. There's an F-150 bearing down on you. It's 3 blocks away coming closer because let's be honest, as parents, we always exaggerate. I mean, truth is, it's like he had 15 minutes to get across the road, but it's like it was right there, right? And that's kind of what James is, or what Jude's getting at here is this idea. We got to be people willing to have enough urgency and enough burden to snatch others. Listen, here's the deal. There's some people in your world and my world that need snatching. They do. There's some coworkers you need to snatch. You're done having the debate. You're done having the conversation. You got to have a little bit of oomph and be able to sit there and say, listen, I'm not going to let you go to hell. I'm not going to let you get back into that addiction. I'm not going to let you leave that marriage. I'm snatching you. Who is it in your world around you that needs some snatching? I'm almost half tempted to rename our church, call ourselves Snatching Church. Grab the white van we have down there, and we're going to snatch people. Okay, that might have gone a little too far, but we got to have that urgency. We're going to snatch people. The stakes are too high. And listen, I get the pushback. It's like, well, you don't understand. I've tried that. I've tried talking to them, and I've tried inviting my coworker, and I've tried inviting my neighbor. I've tried inviting my spouse, and every time they say no. Hey, listen, I think this might encourage you some. And that is this, is that you got to understand that when it comes to this, when it comes to having a burden and reaching our community, inviting our community, you got to understand that saving is all up to God, but inviting is all up to us. Saving is all up to God, but inviting is all up to us. Do you realize that you and I, we have zero saving power? I know a lot of people are like, well, Seth, if I just get you to go talk to my husband, you could save him. No, I can't. Or if I just get you to go talk to my teen, you'd somehow save him. No. Saving is all up to God, period. But the inviting is all up to us. That's the burden. That's the burden we're called to carry when we're talking about this mission of God. We're called to invite. And so for some of us, that burden of inviting others, that burden of inviting others and seeing the need and answering and responding to the need of the world around us by inviting them into this relationship with Jesus. For some of us, it starts with just making a move. It starts with some action. But here's why I say that this might encourage some of you, is that for some of you, it also might not mean necessarily making a move, but actually moving on. See, what's interesting is when it comes to inviting people, because I hear every excuse, and I always hear all the stories, excuses I've made myself. And it's like, well, I've tried that person. I've asked them to come time and time again. Listen, well, I do believe that there's certain people in our lives that God has placed a burden on, that you got to keep asking, you got to keep inviting. The vast majority of the people that God places a burden for us to live out this mission of Jesus, inviting them to church, inviting them into a relationship with Jesus, listen, all he asks us to do is invite. Not take care of the saving part. Like your job is simply to invite. And listen, if they ignore that invitation, you don't have to just sort of keep going time and time and time again, the same 3 people, and wondering why they never come to church. Listen, let me unpack this real quick. So Matthew chapter 22, verse 1 through 10, Jesus, he shares a story about this. He's talking about this feast, and he shares this master. He says that Jesus told them a bunch of parables. He said the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a king who prepared a great wedding feast for his son. When the banquet was ready, he sent his servants to notify those who were invited, but they all refused to come. So he sent other servants to tell them, the feast has been prepared, the Ruth's Chris Steakhouse has been ordered, and everything's ready. Come to the banquet. But the guests he'd invited ignored them and went their own way, one to his farm, another to his business. Others even seized his messengers, insulted them, killed them. They rejected the invitation. But notice the master's response in this. He doesn't sit there and say, well, you just got to keep working on those same 3 people. Time in, just keep at it. You got to convince them for your need for this feast. No, that's what he says. It says, and he said to his servants, the wedding feast is ready, and the guests I invited aren't worthy of the honor. Now go out to the street corners and invite everyone you see. So the servants, verse 10, so the servants brought in everyone they could find, good and bad alike, and the banquet hall was filled with guests. Here's what I'm getting at. Some of the reason we don't always invite is because we think that it's our job, one, to either try to save them, in the sense of we feel like we've got to somehow convince them about their need for Jesus. Like convince somebody that somehow you need Jesus. I'm going to convince you about this. Listen, what does the master tell them to do? They come back, the invitation's been turned down. He doesn't say, hey, go right back there. You got to convince them their need for this. No, he says, go find some other people. He goes, so they didn't accept your invitation. Well, dust it off. Quit feeling sorry for yourself and move on and invite somebody else. Because the harvest fields are ripe. There are so many people, and look at where he tells them to start. He says, listen, rather than trying to convince people their need for Jesus, why don't you just start with those who are already aware and recognize their need for something more than the life they're living? We want to reach people over the city. Hey, let's start with the broken. Let's start with the forgotten. Let's start with those who are overlooked. Let's start with those who everyone else walks right on by and refuses to invite. See, so often people are like, I don't know of anyone to invite to church. Well, do you know some people who are broken, who are hurting, who have some issues, who are depressed? Then trust me, you know some people to invite to church. Start there. Because think about it. If you were ever invited and you came and answered an invitation to come to a church as an adult or as a teenager, let's be honest, you probably answered that in a season in your life where you were in more than a little bit of need, where you were in rock bottom, where you were at a place where I don't know what to do. I've tried everything else. I've tried what the world tells me to do. I've tried living life how I thought I should live it, and I'm still empty and I'm still desperate for more. That was my story. I had a friend who invited me to church, and listen, he invited a bunch of times, but the moment that it actually became real for me is when I hit rock bottom, when I got kicked out of University of Oklahoma for bad academics, and I was, living out of my car, and I'm just, I hit rock bottom. I was in need. How many know that when he came and invited me again in that moment to come to church, Yeah, sign me up. Who is it? It's in need around you. Who's hurting around you? Who's wounded around you? Start there. We're called to invite and bring most those that everyone else overlooks, the beggars and the broken, the forgotten and the forsaken. I had a pastor friend of mine who gave me this quote. It's always really stuck with me, and I love it. It's this simple statement of this. It says, if we exist to help the broken, we'll always have an audience. If we exist to help the broken, we will always have an audience. Again, these chairs, they should burden us. They should be bringing some faces and some names of people that we work with, people we hang around with, who are in desperate need of a relationship and the life that can only be found in a relationship with Jesus Christ. In fact, I like how Jesus puts it. Luke chapter 5, verse 31 through 32. If you doubt this, is Jesus' heart and this is his burden, it says, hey, Jesus heard about it. He spoke up and said, who needs a doctor? The healthy or the sick? I'm here inviting outsiders, not insiders. An invitation to a changed life, changed inside and out. I love that. And that's our heart. You know,